And we are live. Welcome to Music Matters with Jason Tramm. Thank you so much for joining us for our unique podcast community where we explore the triumphs and challenges of the performing arts world as seen through the eyes of distinguished artists like the one you just heard introduce the show today. That's a first for our show. We have Kyle Dillingham, one of the virtuoso fiddlers in the United States, and we're so delighted that he's here. He's an emissary for his music around the world and for American music around the world. He is from Oklahoma City and started playing the violin when he was 9 years old, receiving a bachelor's degree in instrumental music performance from Oklahoma City University. He is an Oklahoma Creative Ambassador and was 2009 recipient of the Oklahoma Governor's Arts Award. While still in high school, he was featured twice at Nashville's Grand Ole Opry. He's performed for the King of Malaysia, wow, and the Princess of Thailand, Singapore's National Celebration Day, and many, many times all over the world. He's been on TV. He's quite a personality, and we're delighted to have him here on Music Matters. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you, Jason. Very nice to be here. Nice to meet you today, and looking forward to chatting with you.
Well, it's always great to meet new artists, and I heard you were playing, and I just love fiddle music. But I could tell that there was great depth. Fiddle music is such an interesting genre to me because it takes the Irish reel and then it brings it to Appalachia, to America, and we add our own to it. We add our own elements to it, and I just love that kind of combination.
Right. The fiddle is kind of like you have to look so far back to find that those origins of the bowed stringed instrument, probably somewhere in Central Asia. And what I love is that there's some version of this instrument just about anywhere you go in the world. So being able to play the violin has been kind of a passport for me. And everywhere I've gone now, having represented Oklahoma and my home state and the United States in over 40 countries, I've found that anywhere I go, I'm welcome and even connecting instantly with the people, because there's something about the sound of maybe even of the instrument, but certainly the sound of the heart that comes right through.
Yeah, I think every culture does have a bowed string instrument. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, I had a chance to do some work with the Mary Rose Trust in Portsmouth, England, and they unearthed and raised in the late 80s the missing battleship of Henry VIII, and it had sunk in the Battle of the Solent against the French, and and it just went straight down with the whole 500-member crew and all of the artifacts, and just sunk. But what had happened is it buried itself in the ocean floor, and half the hull was completely preserved, along with a snapshot of Tudor England like we'd never seen before. They found a still sham at the bottom of the ocean. And when I was at the museum, I got to do a VIP tour and actually got to hold in my hand a fiddle that was raised from the bottom of the ocean that had been preserved in the Mary Rose. And
wow,
and so it kind of tells it like it changed. It changed history. It changed what we knew about the origins, but it also goes to show that something of this instrument had been aboard ships. It was the entertainment. And so the ships were going all over the world, the age of exploration. So you start seeing it being planted, so to speak, along with other things that we find, like things that are growing and fruits and vegetables that weren't native to different lands, but that got there somehow, and it was aboard the ship. So I guess we have that to thank.
Isn't it amazing how we export culture? Like how, the probably Central Asia took its string instruments. People would hear it on the Silk Road. It comes with it, and every culture puts their own stamp on it as well.
Right. And reminds me, in 2017 and 2019, I did two different tours in Gansu province, which is in sort of north central China. It actually encompass most of the Silk Road until it hits kind of gets out of China, is in Gansu province. And so we were there as guests at the Silk Road International Exposition, and it was a big cultural exposition, world leaders. But we were there, the only representatives of the United States. But the connection that I made was we titled our tour "The Silk Road and the Fiddle," and I said we wouldn't have American fiddle culture without the Silk Road. And you're exactly right.
It is astounding how music can break borders. I mean, I've conducted and I was conducting in Albania. I did Porgy and Bess when it was
Oh,
fascinating to be in a moderate Muslim country exporting American culture. It was so interesting. I mean, music has the way to break down borders. Politics and all the other things can divide us, but music is one of the only things in art that connects us.
right. Isn't that wonderful? There's a local history museum in Edmond, Oklahoma, which is kind of a northern suburb of Oklahoma City, that just last month launched an exhibit called Kyle Dillingham and Horseshoe Road: America's Musical Ambassadors, and the whole exhibit basically tells that story. And it takes a look at some of the artifacts and the gifts that we've brought back, and some of the things that we've done, and the accomplishments we've made overseas. Essentially, and especially the work we've done with the U.S. State Department. Formally, the way musical diplomacy is such a powerful tool. I had been inspired by one of my heroes, Roy Clark, at a young age. Roy had done these iconic, sort of groundbreaking tours behind the Iron Curtain in Soviet Russia in the late 70s, height of the Cold War. And it was just like, when nothing could be done diplomatically, there went Roy Clark. And my manager now is the last 4 or 5 years was Roy Clark's manager for
Wow.
his lifelong partner. And he's an older gentleman, but still gung ho and full time representing the Oak Ridge Boys still as one of his artists. But we worked together, and he said, Kyle, those tours were so important. That tour was so important because when we finished, he said, all of sorry, my microphone was sagging. He said, but we got letters, handwritten letters from all of the congressmen in DC, and we got invited for state dinners at the White House. They said, the state had been trying and trying and trying to make these connections diplomatically with Russia, but nothing would happen. And then Roy Clark went and played a little country music, and
Feet are
so
tapping and everyone
people are getting
relaxes.
excited. And then what do you know? Phone calls started actually passing through and they would say, the State Department would start asking some important diplomatic questions. They say, first, we must know, when will Roy Clark be back? We'll answer your questions, but first we need another date on the books for the Roy Clark and his country music. And I watched that as a kid, probably about the same time I was discovering the fiddle, and thinking to myself, man, what a cool thing. And
Why don't
and
we
now
step back
having
in time? Did you always know you wanted to be an artist?
It's funny. Up until high school, actually, I was dead set on a career as a professional skateboarder,
Wow.
and I was loving the music from the time it began, but it was just like a deep love. But my laser focus was skateboarding,
Huh.
and and it's kind of crazy because actually now, th- you know, 20, 30 years later, I actually started incorporating the skateboard into my routine.
What?
It started on a show. I was doing big production in Thailand in 2009, with a Thai national artist, very famous Thai director and a theater producer, and she had this big production sponsored by the King of Thailand that she was looking for. Her mother loved the Western violin, and she said, I always dreamed of doing a production of this very famous, sort of the equivalent of imagine like Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, but for the Thai language. But it has all this beautiful classical Thai music that accompanies the story, almost in a musical format. But she said, I always dreamed of doing a version of Prala with the Western violin, and actually using a violinist as this Northern Thai prince in the leading role. interpreting all the music on that Western violin on stage in his role as this prince. She said, but she had spent a year auditioning violinists in her country and just could not find anybody that could do on the stage. They could play the violin or they could be on the stage, but they couldn't do both. She said, but when I saw you play, I instantly said, you can do this. But she said, uh-oh, you don't speak Thai, do you? She said, no problem. She said, so she rewrote the entire script. It's like rewriting Romeo and Juliet for a non-English speaking Romeo. And she said, but it's okay. She said, people know the story anyways, and anything you need to say, you will do it with your violin and people will understand you.
What a visionary person. That's really fascinating.
She is a visionary person indeed. But about a year after that, she had put me together with a Thai pop star on this East meets West music battle, so to speak. And during that process of rehearsals, she discovered that I skateboarded. So we went, put a skateboard together. And she said, can you do both at the same time? And I said, well, I've done them both my whole life. So no doubt if I practice, I surely could. And ended up putting this together. And in 2019, when I was invited to make my Grand Ole Opry debut, there, right on that hollowed ground, the sacred space that made country music famous throughout the world, I came flying in on my skateboard, playing my fiddle, and did a 360 right there in that inner circle.
People must have gone bonkers.
It was wonderful. But
you put the show in show business. That is fantastic.
Absolutely. What I've discovered, Jason, is that, and I'm not really one. It's funny that I say that. It's like I'm backpedaling, but I'm not really one for gimmicks. But skateboarding was always my passion, so I'm excited to do it. Just like I'm excited to do my fiddling. But I will say this, that I think in music, and this is one of the things, if I'm ever invited to meet with and speak with young musicians, whether it's high school or middle school, I always bring up this point that as performers, when we take the stage, we always have this unique opportunity to change people's lives. And I believe personally that through our music, it's a very powerful tool to inspire, encourage, and even bring healing to our audiences. But I said, sometimes people are closed off and they're not open to these things. So I said, you need to get people's attention. And if you can do something that's going to surprise your audience, that's kind of why I wanted to open today with the violin. Because,
I love it.
Maybe I don't know how many episodes you've had, but there hasn't been one that starts.
278.
So 278. Everybody thinks that what's going to happen is it's going to start with an introduction by Jason Tramm and introduce the artist. But maybe we catch them off guard and it leaves somebody vulnerable because now they don't know what to do. And that vulnerability leaves them open to this message that you have to bring and to convey through your music and otherwise, whatever you have to say.
Wow. So now did you grow up in a musical family?
Well, that's a kind of a loaded question. Most of my life, I didn't really think of it that way. I had an aunt that was a concert pianist and church organist, and was always my accompanist for my solos at state solo and ensemble competitions, and we would do music at my grandma's house. We'd gather around the piano for holidays, and we'd do everything from the beer barrel polka to Ave Maria. A good Czech Catholic family upbringing, and but that was the extent. I always just said that. I said, well, I've got this aunt that plays piano, and all of us kids, cousins, we all just took piano lessons, But more recently, I began to discover more about my ancestors, and in fact, a few years ago, I had the Oklahoma Hall of Fame produces a magazine, and they wanted to do a story about me and my music. But the writer wanted to go beyond just the typical stories. And she said, I want to know more about your ancestry and your family and how did you get to Oklahoma and this and that. So we started digging around. My great-great-grandfather made the land run of the Cherokee Strip in 1893. His immigration to America was actually listed at Ellis Island as from Moravia. But I think of Armenian descent originally, had settled in what is modern day Prague, but came to America and eventually ran in the land run in 1893, settled the farm that my brother and is still turning the soil today. And but in the process of doing this, we found a picture. We found some amazing pictures. One of my great grandfather standing in front of the original sod house, like the dugout sod house, and and then about a year later, when they had their first log style home built, there he was, a bunch of chickens at his feet, his wife at his side, and in his hands, a fiddle.
Oh, wow.
My great grandfather fiddled. I always heard of this Uncle Lewis that played the fiddle, but I didn't. When you hear about an Uncle Lewis, it's not my bloodline. It was a great uncle. It would have been his son, but it wasn't the direct line that would be my family's line. And so it never meant that much to me, but it turns out they had a family band, and of course they all learned from the patriarch, from Joseph, and all the kids learned. And I recalled in that moment one time when I was with my grandpa, and we were working in the field, and it rained, and we had to go to the house, and just kind of nothing else to do. So he went to the back room and pulled an accordion out of the closet, a big accordion, and he pulled it out and he put it on. And my grandpa, I heard him playing, and he was like, I don't quite remember, but he was playing chords and knew where the bass notes were and stuff. And I was like, that is amazing. And it just baffled me. So there was, a couple generations ago, everybody in my family evidently played music. And probably it got lost in the hard work on the farm and the the modernization of society and culture, and going off to college. And like, my grandpa stayed, but my other two great uncles, his brothers, they went on to college, and they ended up in journalism and extremely successful. One of my great uncles was a photographer for the Air Force, and Pulitzer Prize nominated for his photography of the POW exchange at the end of the Vietnam War, and photographer of the year for the U.S. military. And then my other uncle was an NBC cameraman and news, and he had actually, his footage of the shooting of JFK was the first to make it to the news station, and that's how he broke into his career. It got aired on the 6 p.m. news that night, and it kind of busted him into a career. But what was left was my grandpa back at the farm to toil and put the work in, feeding the world, while the rest of us were out doing what we do. But I've always been so proud of that tradition and that legacy from the farming standpoint too. And when I was a kid, actually, even earlier than wanting to be a skateboarder, I wanted to be a farmer. And like my grandfather, and my brother is a farmer. My brother is a farmer. He's an ag teacher, and I'm really proud of that, because when I had those years of putting in 10 to 15 hours a day driving a tractor, pulling a 4-bottom plow in slow gear, just in a day, you couldn't measure your progress when you looked out across the field. It took several days to actually finally see something being done. And thus, when people say, where's your inspiration for playing the violin? It may not have directly inspired playing the violin, but it gave me the tools I needed to learn to play the violin, and to go to music school and put in those 10 hours a day of practicing and rehearsing and studying that it takes day in and day out. It's like this was just like reminded me of my youth, helping my grandpa on the farm. You put those hours and hours and hours in, and you're not going to see the payoff. I tell young violinists, I say,
good story. That's a good analogy, certainly.
I say, don't, if you're going to start playing the violin, give yourself 5 years before you start measuring progress. And then, even at that point, start measuring a year at a time. Don't, like, say, well, I practiced an hour. Let's see how I'm doing now. You're not going to see it, and you're not going to see that wheat growing until till that following spring. So,
Now, you've studied both classical, you were steeped in classical tradition as well as fiddle tradition. How did the fiddle playing come to the fore? Is it always something that's been there, or is that something that you've developed as you started mastering your instrument?
well, it was the original inspiration. It was the reason I played violin, so to speak. When I was spending that time on the farm, my grandpa always kept Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys going in the pickup truck, and it kind of became the soundtrack of my childhood and the music that was really I was feeling in my soul. And so when I was about 9 years old, I was with my family at a garage sale, and we found this little quarter-size violin,
And you still
and
have it.
I do. I do still have it. It's amazing. I'd actually sold it at one point, but it was to my aunt. So her son was going to learn to play the violin, and he didn't continue with it. And at some point, I asked if I could have that violin back. I'm so glad I did. Um, and even it's actually last month, the Edmond History Museum. Edmond is just a little suburb north of Oklahoma City. Just launched a full-time exhibit that's going to run through December 31st this year, called Kyle Dillingham and Horseshoe Road, which is the name of my band, America's Musical Ambassadors. And that little violin, where it all began, is in the exhibit. And a really cool side story is that my guitar player, Peter Marcus, he's also a fabulous violinist, and we interchange during our
Oh,
shows. But he took his first violin teacher. Karen Smarto was the woman whose garage sale I bought the violin from. So my first violin came from the same woman who taught him his first violin lessons. But what we didn't know until just last month was when he saw that violin, he said, "You know what? When I started playing, I didn't actually have a violin yet. So Karen lent me a violin for the first month." And he said, "That's the violin." So we both had the same violin. And here, 28 years of making music together later,
what brand? What
and
brand was it, if I may ask?
it's just a little German factory
Hmm.
Strad copy, just but it's old, and it's a solid little fiddle, and
Inspired the next step.
it did. So, but it was a start, and I wanted to fiddle. And it's funny because when I got to high school, my orchestra director, and in sixth grade, I started in the strings program too, and I'd been playing violin for a couple of years at that point. But that's where I really started, like, I'm going to start working on learning to read music. Because all my fiddling was an oral tradition. I had a teacher that was teaching me bluegrass fiddle all by ear. So then, kind of in tandem, I was very slowly learning to play, and it took me, I had to practice every single quarter and half and whole note of orchestral music in first position. Um, you know, but I would memorize my parts in junior high and high school, and that was the way I'd play it because I couldn't sight read it, um, even once I'd learned it. But my orchestra director was also a bluegrass fan, and he was a violinist, but also played bluegrass mandolin. And when I got to high school, I started private violin lessons with him. But I would go to his house on Thursdays afternoons for a violin lesson. But then on Friday evenings, he'd come over to my house for band practice, and he was playing mandolin and singing bass in my bluegrass gospel band. So, and he understood that I had this love and passion for music, and he didn't want to burn that out of me at too young of an age. So he fed me some things that I could kind of, slurp, get around on, and feel some gratification, and not, he wasn't trying to get me to learn a Mozart concerto or something that would be just, infinitely frustrating. But and then he said, "I knew that there would come a point you would go to college, and you would be ready. You'd be ready to put in those hours and put in the
That
time that it
catches
was
up.
going to
That
take.
catches up. It's like the
Right.
the Suzuki method, right? It's all oral. Like that's how we learn language. So it's
Right.
you hear the patterns, you mimic the patterns, you learn the patterns, and then the ear catches up later. It's actually a really interesting journey.
Right. And you conduct opera. We all as kids start learning to sing. A little kid doesn't start, singing Twinkle Twinkle and you say,
Rodolfo.
"Okay, oh no, no, let me show you that you got to watch that accidental there." um, Wait, what key are you in? There's a natural thing about
Down a half
music.
step, please.
I love being at the violin shop on a day when a child is getting their first instrument, and there they are getting sized for their first tiny little violin, and I put the bow in their hand, and I show them how to get the bow going, and I with their arm, and I say, now you just keep going, and I grab my violin and I start playing with them on the beat. I say, now you keep going, don't pay any attention to me. And by the time we end, they're like levitating. They feel the excitement and the adrenaline. And I tell them, I said, okay, was that fun? Yes. I said there's going to be a lot of hard work ahead of you in mastering this instrument. But I said, I want you to always remember that on day one, you were making music with this instrument. And don't forget that you've always been capable of making the music. Now it's just simply, it's like typing or anything else. You've just got to put the time and the hours in to do it.
Have to love it at all times. Right,
Amen.
that's the most important thing. I tell my son who's a musician, he's a training musician, and I'm like, you have to love to practice by yourself and to master yours. You really work against yourself. You have to kind of always be patient, take time to between sessions, kind of think. But you have to love to be by. I still spend a lot of time by myself at night studying scores. That's most of what we do is practice and train and get ready for the next project.
Right, we have to always be prepared, because we never know what's coming. And the philosophy that I have is, I don't want a barrier between me and being able to share my music with somebody. And that's the lesson I've learned going all over the world is that, um, okay, it's maybe their traditional music is different than mine. Well, let me learn some of it, because that's going to help me to connect the same way I would. They don't know the Orange Blossom Special, but there's got to be an Orange Blossom Special of whatever country it is that you're going to, or something that's going to just instantly be significant and meaningful. And so be prepared. And I tell kids when I'm working with them, you know, uh, we you know, playing perfectly is not the most important thing for connecting with an audience, but we want to be the best we can because it's going to help. You don't want any kind of a barrier. You don't want somebody out there to be thinking, well, that guy was a little, that tenor, like you said, that tenor didn't quite make it up there to that high note. Um, you don't want that to be the thing that snaps somebody out of having their moment, and we never know because people are coming. Everybody's got their problems and their issues and things they're dealing with. It's part of life, and people are giving of their time to come, and oftentimes paying money to watch you do what you're doing. And this can't no longer be about us. Our hours and hours of practice, that was about us. That was us, investing in ourselves, bettering ourselves, with the discipline that it took. But now, when you hit the stage, this is about these people that have sacrificed their time and treasure to come, and we have this golden opportunity to perhaps change their life.
Music makes life better. It just gives us it restores our soul. It lets us to reconnect to something more beautiful than the news, certainly. And
Yeah.
we all need that, no matter what culture we come from.
I didn't take much to top the news there, Jason.
Oof. The endless gas prices and all the stuff we're facing that's important, but it's also important to unplug from that and to connect with something greater.
Right. Absolutely. Something that we can all connect on and relate to. And um, you know, what I love is that music definitely brings us all together. Um, I'd heard I heard a um, uh, what's his name, the comedian and banjo player, um,
Steve Martin.
Steve Martin. I heard an old Steve Martin skit one time, and he was like, "Yeah, he's like, man, if only Reagan had you know played the or if Nixon had played the banjo, we're going into talks with China, and it's like, well, before we get started on these talks, how about a little Foggy Mountain Breakdown?" And it's like, wouldn't that? And it's kind of a joke, but man, I have watched that happen, and how the atmosphere changes. Been in a room full of stuffy dignitaries, foreign dignitaries meeting, whether it was here at our state capitol in Oklahoma, or if I was in some other country, and there's, um, it just seems tense. It seems like everybody is trying to figure out how to relax, or how to make the others comfortable, or where do we begin? How do we connect? Forget the agenda that each of us bring, but and then all of a sudden it's like, some glad morning when this life is o'er, I fly away, and pretty soon you've got these grown men in suits that are like nearly making fools of themselves, or they're, or singing, or I'll play something that they know, like I've maybe a little Chinese melody, and all of a sudden they're singing like they're in a karaoke bar or something, and by the time it ends, everybody's hugging and laughing, and there's an energy and there's a synergy, and it's like you can't move quickly enough to catch up, with the red tape that's probably there, that's going to be the thing now holding back. It's not us connecting as humans with the things that we're seeking to achieve with one another. Instead,
Absolutely.
yeah, realizing there's a win-win, and that we're going to have fun doing this.
So, you're running around the world now performing, and your career doing so many different things. All of a sudden, COVID hits, the world
Yeah.
stops, right? And we had to, so we've all become philosophers during the COVID period. What did you learn about yourself during this period?
I learned that I'm a pretty good video editor.
We've all become somewhat of that, haven't we?
Right. I learned that there's still a need. There's still a need for music, and there's a need for the interaction and the message. Instantly, what I did was I said took a step back. I said, my mission is to share my music with as many people as possible. I'm not doing that in live performance, so I started making personal video serenades, and I wasn't just creating content, but I was creating content that was coming from one person and aimed at another person specifically, with a specific goal in mind, whether it was a birthday, anniversary, or just a friend that needed an encouraging word, or a favorite song to a mother or father, or for a daughter or son, and really started taking a delight in bringing that, and when it would be shared, hearing about the tears, or hearing about the joy that it brought. And so I think, what I learned is that there is definitely no virtual replacement for the live performance. I had been called upon. I'm an alumni of the American Music Abroad touring program through the U.S. State Department, and early on, they reached out to four alumni artists, and asked us to join them as sort of a think tank on how to navigate the pandemic, and continue the U.S.'s international mission of musical diplomacy through this thing that we were going through. And I was proud to be a part of that operation. And I can also tell you that some of the stupidest ideas I've ever thought of came out of my mouth. Um, they were the best ideas that we could think of, but everybody had to admit that these were stupid ideas. They were just the best that we could do at the time. But I always was the voice at the end of a meeting that would say, let us keep in mind that that the end game for sure on everybody's mind is to get back to live programming internationally. And
During
it was
COVID, we did 100 virtual choir and orchestra projects between my son and I to my university choirs and my orchestra and my summer festivals and 2 choral societies. And that
yeah,
kept communities together. It was all we had. So we'd
right.
rehearse via Zoom and I couldn't hear them, but I would rehearse them and then they'd submit me videos. We'd edit them together. And that is
Wow, Jason.
not the same as what I'm used to is sitting in a room working with people. But
And what a waste of energy too, because you probably realize that every minute of content, it's like you've spent 6 hours, you know. but but the other thing that came from it was realizing that I think it's easy for us to start forming our identities based on what we do. And it's like to say I'm a violinist, or I'm a conductor, or I'm a this or a that. But these are just tools. These are just tools. They're very powerful tools, and so that's why it's so easy to get lost in our identity. But they're just tools nonetheless. And put them down. What is the real gift? What is the real message? What is it that we are doing with these tools? What are the connections we are trying to make? And that's what was overemphasized to me during that time. Is that even without my violin, I should still have a message, and I should still be able to connect with people and achieve my goals. Um, and if it's not the best bow or the best violin, I should still be able to do it. I think I know I lost, hours, maybe days of my life in college trying to find the perfect bow. And at the end of the day, what I realized that I really love about a bow is that if it has a full head of hair. and in a violin, what I really love is that it has a new set of strings.
that does make a huge difference, doesn't it?
But yeah,
What are you playing these days? What's your preferred concert instrument?
this is a Joseph Hell. It's a French violin made in Lille, France in 1888. And I also I have a second violin that I carry a double violin case. I have a second violin that's rigged with pickups for my not straight acoustic playing, but this is the flagship of my fleet. And then that other violin I play is actually an Oklahoma-made violin, and I acquired it from a
Hmm.
luthier here by the name of Rocky. He passed away um, in about 2010 or 11, but very fond memories, and I carry his sounds with me still. But in 2006, I was about to do a tour um, celebrating the Oklahoma Centennial internationally with a 10-city tour of Japan and Thailand. And I wanted my instrument to also represent my state. And Rocky let me just take a pick of all of his violins. And yeah, it was a violin made in 2004 right here in my home state of Oklahoma.
There are some great modern violins being made. We had a luthier come on the show. He's making some really amazing pieces of art. One had the scroll of the Statue of Liberty, but he repairs Stradivarius for people in New York. He's one of those guys who fixes the old instruments. And
Wow.
we're going to do a live podcast in his apartment with a Polish virtuoso. And we're going to go through and we're going to hear modern versus ancient violins and talk about the different colors with a couple
I
players.
love
But
that.
I love violins. I just love the whole kind of the provenance of the instruments and the connection between the old and the new with the player and the instrument. It's just fascinating to me.
Right. So I mentioned I'm also a skateboarder, and I skateboard with my violin sometimes. So naturally, I'm not going to do that with this.
No, I would
Um,
say
I play Glasser bows exclusively, and so you can see this Glasser Patriot with the red, white, and blue hairs, which is funny. It's intended to be a United States patriotic device, but it's actually multi national it's a multinational bow because you turn it upside down, it becomes the bleu blanc rouge, the French flag, and people in Thailand say, "Oh, it's the Thai flag and Russian flag," and just about any, these colors are widely used across the world in flags.
I love it.
But so Andrew Glasser, likewise, when I was starting to incorporate the skateboard, he was also at the same time developing a carbon violin, and so I use a Glasser carbon violin, beautiful purple violin, when I do my skateboarding with the fiddle. So that's the third.
We got a question from the audience. This is from Joan from California, and she has, "Have you ever fallen playing the violin?"
I have, and that's kind of a funny question to ask a violinist.
I've never asked it before. You're the first.
Have you ever fallen playing violin? Yes, I know what she means. But actually, I have actually fallen playing the violin while I wasn't skateboarding too. It was pretty recently. I was on an American Music Abroad tour in Kosovo in 2019, in spring of 2019, and our last concert of the tour was in Jakova. And the U.S. ambassador to Kosovo was there, and it was a big deal, and it was being filmed and all this stuff. And at the end, we had this just standing ovation, and we were going to do a new one final piece. And so we unplugged, and I said, "Let's just do this acoustic." We came to the front of the stage, stepped kind of in front of the mics and the monitors and everything, and just said, we're acoustic musicians. We're playing these instruments that were designed for halls like these. And so we just started playing. It's just something beautiful and light, and letting people, almost like come closer. And it was just this gorgeous moment. And when it ended, like, the audience was just clapping and cheering, and I was so excited, and I kind of took a step back, and I tripped on the monitor.
Oh no.
And I literally fell backwards, and I kept the violin in the air. Like, I'm a professional faller because of my skateboarding. I always say, skateboarding is about 50% learning tricks, and it's 50% learning how to fall without killing yourself. And so I was uninjured, and the violin was safe, and I jumped back up. And at the end, I was like, man, hopefully at least somebody got that on camera. But they were cutting live, and they weren't on the wide shot, so they totally missed it. But I will say this: early on with my skateboarding in Thailand, I was doing this show that I was telling you about with this Thai pop star, and what the director did is she built the stage in this theater, and the theater, it was sort of an outdoor theater, but it was kind of covered, but you could set the chairs and arrangement however you wanted. So it was done. It had a concrete floor. So she set the chairs with a center aisle, and she built the stage with a ramp coming straight off the front of the center of the stage. And so at some point in the show, I would get on my skateboard and I would just take off.
Devil went down at yours.
And I would go straight off the front of the stage down this ramp, and just like 100 miles an hour between the aisle of the audience, and they just were like freaking out. Like, there's not an insurance policy big enough in America for something like this. And I would spin around and circle through the audience, and then I would ramp back up on stage.
Oh, that must be so exciting.
And it was so exciting. But during sound check for the show, I was I wasn't doing anything crazy. I was just kind of just going around the perimeter, just kind of feeling the space. And they had some of the audience on platforms that had risers, and they were skirted, so you couldn't see the legs of these risers. And the front wheels of my skateboard hit one of these legs, and instantly I was stopped dead in my tracks. I went flying. The violin and bow both came out of my hands. Oh. It broke my carbon fiber bow, which is pretty heavy impact. And it wasn't this instrument, but it was another. It was a modern Italian violin that I had, about a $7,000 instrument, and it just hit and just busted, and like about a chunk about this big off the front had just came completely off. And interestingly enough, it was still kind of in tune, but it was just like I was like, I got to get this loosened because I don't want it to any further structural damage or anything. And the director contacted Yamaha Thailand, and they sent like an electric violin out for me to use in the show. Thankfully, there was some kind of a backup option, but it was at that point where I learned, I need to figure out a different solution. I can't go on. Fortunately, I was okay.
Thank God.
As well. Once again, I was still okay. I've learned how to fall. So, good question. I love that there's some interaction with our audience here today. Thank you very much.
They take in directions you'd never expect, which I love. So feel free to keep on sending the comments in, folks. Yeah, and so I'm just so fascinated. So would you like to play us a piece?
Sure. Oh, I'd love to. I'll tell you what. I just learned here a couple weeks ago that I have a song, a fiddle tune that I wrote in. Well, I wrote it in 2020. My manager, I had all this extra time not performing, and my manager said, we need a Kyle Dillingham signature piece. No matter how well you play The Devil Went Down to Georgia, people are always going to be thinking about Charlie Daniels. So we need people to be thinking about Kyle Dillingham, this brilliant kind of impresario mind. And so I wrote this piece called Freedom Bells, and I entered it last year in the 2021 International Songwriting Competition as an instrumental, without the opening introduction. And I just found out that I'm a winner of the 2021 International Songwriting Competition, over 21,000 entries, 150 countries worldwide. And so I'm happy. I would like to play this for you. This is called Freedom Bells. Freedom is the one thing never gets old. Anybody shouting, anybody singing, anybody shouting, anybody singing, anybody wanna hear those freedom bells ring? I said, don't you wanna hear those freedom bells ring?
Bravo. Oh, my. That's made my day.
Awesome, Jason. So
What a
yeah,
spectacular piece. When did you write that?
I wrote it in 2020.
In 2020, during the height of
no
COVID.
no opportunity to perform it anywhere. But it was funny. About the same time I was working on this piece, I remember that day I'd headed to Target to see if they had any butter or flour or anything like that in stock. And I was like at Target on a Tuesday afternoon, just kind of walking around, a little depressed. But I had been excited about this tune, and but then at the same time, it was like it was depressing because there was nothing to do with it, you know. And but I remembered I was just kind of all alone there in that Target. There was like nobody there, and all of a sudden my phone rings, and I answer. It was the president of the board of the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, and they contacted me just totally out of the blue, and said, and not every year do we do this, but every now and then we pick somebody, usually an artist, that we're going to honor at our induction ceremony as an ambassador of goodwill for the state of Oklahoma. And they said, it has been decided that if you're willing to accept, we would like to honor you in this way at the 93rd induction ceremony this year. I was just like, kind of just still pacing the the store, and I was like, yes, this sounds wonderful. It was like the best news in the world. It's like
the mundane to the spectacular. I love that.
Somebody was throwing me a line, and I said, and I've got this song that I would love to sing. I'd have another song that I was writing about that time before things shut down, and it's kind of my own personal tribute to the state of Oklahoma and kind of my own personal anthem. And it was a song that I wrote, and then basically my member said, don't be playing this out. Let's wait for the right moment, because this is a great song. We want to make this right. And so like I didn't play it, and then COVID happened, and then and I had it recorded, but I couldn't share the recording with anybody, and there were no labels, there were no anything happening. And I said, you know what? I think that this induction ceremony would be the perfect place for me to debut my Oklahoma song. And they said, oh, fabulous. And they were excited. I would perform. You got the 1,000 most important, influential people in our state in the same room, play that for them, be honored. And about a month before that happened, October, November, I forget when it was, it's like things were just about to kind of open. And then all of a sudden there was like a little wave, and people freaked out. And so
Omicron.
anything that was on the calendar got canceled again or got postponed again. And that event that induction ceremony went from being a live event to a virtual event, which meant that virtually nobody saw it. And but we just keep going. And I think ultimately what we do is important. And it's not something I guess I come up with. It's after 34 years of doing it and people telling you that it's important, or hearing people tell stories. Like, I can think of countless times where I finished a show and it might not have even been the best performance, and I might have finished feeling like I'd had a bad day, or thinking about that mistake I'd made, or this or that, and somebody comes up to me with tears in their eyes and says, "I just want you to know that you played a song that my grandfather used to play for me every night before I'd go to bed." And it just brought me back. It was like he was here with me again, in tears, and then just turning and walking away. And I think, man, and here I was, thinking about this mistake I'd made, and somebody's life had been changed. And it was just a powerful moment for somebody. And so, I feel that in the midst of the chaos and whatever's happened or whatever comes, just like with Freedom Bells, this song, I ultimately wanted it to be something that represented who I am, and a lot of it to encompass that energy, that can come through in a piece like this. But this idea about freedom and the freedoms that we enjoy here, but honestly, the idea that freedom is, no matter what has been given to us or taken from us, that we always find our freedom within. And in the Bible, it says, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And so we have to not get too focused on what's being given or taken from us. We have to take freedom into our own hands and into our own responsibility, and take that freedom and possess it, and exude it and share it everywhere we go. And
your energy is infectious, and your passion for your art and your passion for your playing, and of course your virtuosity, it's just infectious. And where can people go to find out more about Kyle Dillingham?
My website is kyledillingham.us. Also, there's links to all my social media, but if you just want to jump right to it, Instagram is Kyle Dillingham, Facebook, Kyle Dillingham Music. I mean, if you just type Kyle Dillingham into your Google search, I'm easy to find. You'll have pages and pages and pages of things to see and read about, but definitely reach out. Would love to hear from anybody and everybody, and excited to be a part of your program today, Jason. And
what are your next shows live?
Goodness, my next show live is a very good question. I'm playing the June 4. No, see, that was this week. Got confused. What is coming up? June 24th.
Answer any questions.
Friday, June 24th is we're live at the UCO Jazz Lab in Edmond, Oklahoma for our Summer Sizzler. And it's an annual concert we do at a nice venue north of Oklahoma City here. So if you find yourself in Oklahoma and you're looking for something to do on Friday, June the 24th, but otherwise just check out my schedule is up to date and always intact at kyledillingham.us.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining us today, and continued success. I know you do a lot of things and do them beautifully, and I can't wait to see you play live.
Oh man, it'll be wonderful. I would love to work with you someday.
That'd be amazing.
So maybe we'll have to talk later off air and figure out how we can end up in the same room, and maybe with some of your friends, and make some music together.
Well, that would nothing make me more happy, and we will be in touch.
Awesome. Jason, thank you very much. God bless you.
You too. Thank you for joining us on Music Matters with Jason Tramm. Please remember to subscribe on YouTube and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on our upcoming guests and topics. And like and share our videos. It helps us grow. We just hit 1,878 subscribers. We grow every day thanks to people like you. Remember, keep music alive.